The loudest mouth gets the most attention.
It's the shocking feud that has captivated the world.
A co-host with me again tonight, Carole. How you doing?
The exotic zoo owner with a bad mullet and an itchy trigger finger. The big cat rescuer whose husband vanishes and leaves her millions.
What did happen to him?
We have airboats, we have helicopters, and we are looking for Don.
It's all fun and games until whispers of murder are revealed.
The person that did this was very good. 20 years, they don't have a clue.
Carol's drowned him up and fed him to the tigers.
In this three-part special, we go beyond the hype for the real story of Joe Exotic and Carole Baskin.
What is this really about?
It's all coming back to Don Lewis.
The brash strategy to get Joe out of jail.
If we just check the septic tank and find the body, then we walk Joe out.
The unanswered questions about the hitman plot.
You're gonna give this mook $3,000 to go kill somebody? Bull.
And exclusive new details about the disappearance of Don Lewis.
We had the cadaver dog hit numerous times close to this dock. I think it's a good time to approach him and talk to him. Game on.
Kenny, right?
It's tigers, lies, and cover-up. Oh my. Unless you've been living under a rock, you've heard the twisted saga of Joe Maldonado Passage, better known as Joe Exotic. He's the Oklahoma zookeeper who's absolutely obsessed with Carole Baskin of Big Cat Rescue.
Carole Baskin. Yep, that lady that profits over $1.5 million sucking on your heartstrings about on the internet that ain't even true.
Joe holds nothing back on his self-produced internet TV show.
And before you bring me down, it is my belief that you will stop breathing.
For nearly a decade, these two are at each other's throats, and it just gets uglier and uglier.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joe Exotic, and we're gonna make an honest woman out of this bitch.
Carole claims Joe abuses his animals. Joe calls Carole a hypocrite.
The biggest accredited sanctuary in the world only helped 2 animals. For God's sakes, we do that a week.
Things escalate when Joe accuses Carole Baskin of murdering her former husband, Don Lewis, who went missing back in 1997.
You keep them separated because you never want to feed 2 cats from one nipple.
Even though Carole has never been charged or implicated in his disappearance.
She has this black cloud over her head of people thinking that she fed her husband to the tiger. Here it's Carol's birthday next month, and we're shipping her 2 of these.
But Joe Exotic isn't exactly an angel.
What Joe did, what he did to the animals, what happened between him and Carole, his crazy life as a country singer, and it just goes on and on and on and on. It is the biggest show that we have seen to date. Joe has been saying loudly that Don was put in the meat grinder and fed to the tigers.
The feud comes to a head when Joe's arrested on September 7th, 2018.
Federal authorities foil a murder-for-hire plot that targeted Big Cat Rescue owner Carole Baskin and leaves her enemy, Joe Exotic, behind bars.
Joe's sentenced to 22 years in federal prison.
What's going on in this jail is criminal. But what has been done wrong to me by the U.S. Attorney's Office and the federal agents in order to get me in here is the real disturbing part.
Joe's got a lot of friends working on the outside, in true Joe fashion. It's an interesting cast of characters.
My name is Ann Patrick. I met Joe 5 years ago. He was doing a presidential campaign.
And yes, I'm running for President of the United States, and it is about time somebody said what you were thinking.
He was like, this bitch took off with all my presidential now I don't know what to do, in the middle of this campaign. I said, hey, I'll do it. I've never even voted in my life.
Joe Exotic is here for the people of America.
I was like, this guy's a nut, but I am too, so I was like, let's just go see what happens.
Joe's had 4 husbands. At one point, he had 2 at the same time.
You may now kiss.
Dylan Passage is husband number 4.
Since Joe was arrested, like the minute he was arrested, my life was just flipped the upside down. When they said the murder for hire charge, I was shocked. You know, I didn't think Joe would ever take anything that far.
The zoo's new owner is somebody Joe came to know and hate, Jeff Lowe.
This is Tara and Gemma. They're really getting into this.
I think I met Jeff Lowe like the first day or 2 when I went to the park. Old dude with his bandana, bald cap, walked around like he was, you know, the boss.
Joe is in a particularly bad place when Jeff shows up. He's got big-time financial problems, and Carol's suing him.
I have a judgment against me from some down there in Florida.
Carole Baskin filed a lawsuit on me for copyright for some stupid rabbit picture of her staff with dead rabbits.
Joseph needed the money to get out from the lawsuit with Carole Baskin. So here comes Jeff, swooping in with his $35,000, and he says, I'll pay the attorneys, and then I'll put my name on the zoo because I'm such a good guy, I'm gonna help you. So now everything's in his name.
What has been done wrong to me by Jeff Lowe and Carole Baskin is one thing. This is a travesty.
There are so many unanswered questions in a story like this, but the biggest mystery of all is what happened to Don Lewis.
Carole and many others maintain the belief that Don was involved in a plane crash. Carole's been defending these accusations on social media and in her online video diaries.
I think the most likely scenario was that Don left out early of Pilot Country Estates, headed out over the Gulf to fly somewhere under the radar where the air is smoother, and crashed.
My name's Jim Rathman, born and raised in Florida, and I consult for families of missing persons or cold cases. I've worked in law enforcement as uniform patrol. I've done a little bit of undercover narcotics, and I ended up working for the United States Secret Service. When I first started hearing about the Don Lewis disappearance, a lot of red flags stuck out, and it's only an hour and a half from where I live, and I decided I needed to look into this independently and see if there's anything I can do to kind of help out, provide some new leads, or even solve this case if it's possible.
Don Lewis has been missing for 23 years, and no one's been able to prove what actually happened to him.
As an investigator, it's important to look at all the theories and the questions surrounding a cold case. In the case of Don Lewis, there are several. Has he gone to Costa Rica? Did he crash his plane over the Gulf of Mexico? Was Don Lewis murdered by drug traffickers? Was he killed in a business deal gone wrong? Was his wife, Carole Baskin, involved in her missing husband's disappearance? Or the craziest of all, did she feed her husband to the tigers?
Right now, it's a cold case. There's just no real legitimate leads.
Everybody that knows of his disappearance has an idea of what happened, but nobody could prove a thing at this point.
Once we learned that her husband had disappeared, he's never been found, people went, well, what did happen to him?
There's a private investigator, Dan Toporowicz, that I'm really looking forward to meeting with. Dan, being a private investigator and working with Ann Patrick, has brought a lot of information to light. Some of this information could be real useful, not only in the Joe Exotic case, but also for the Don Lewis case as well. Absolutely. Thanks for meeting with me, man.
Absolutely.
What made you get involved in this?
So my partner Dave and I are both retired cops. We work together up in Ohio. He calls me and is like, hey, have you watched the series? So after I watched the series, I called him. I go, yeah, there's more to this. Why? Where are you getting at? He goes, well, let's write him a letter and ask him if there's anything we could do for him. We heard back from Joe, and Joe told us that he wants us on his defense team. So that's when we started digging into the bad police work that was involved in this. And it just has snowballed because it's all coming back to Don Lewis.
And as you know, I'm spending a lot of my time with Don Lewis, and I think Joe was getting close. And
yeah, I think he was getting close, and people were starting to ask Carole some difficult questions, and the sheriff's department's probably reinvestigating and starting to ask some difficult questions. She needed him shut up.
Seems like Dan believes that maybe Carole set up Joe to shut him up.
So the investigation into Don Lewis and the appeal and getting Joe out of jail, we're connecting dots where it appears to us that Carole Baskin and Jeff Lowe are connected to each other, knew each other prior to Jeff coming out to the GW Zoo and trying to help Joe out. And it all turns back to Don Lewis. Joe wanted that whole investigation into Don Lewis. He wants Carole in jail, and all of a sudden now Jeff Lowe shows up at the GW Zoo, and once Joe signed over the zoo to him, he brought on his best friend, Alan Glover. Alan's a convicted felon.
What really hurt Joe at the trial was the testimony of the right-hand man of Jeff Lowe, Alan Glover.
2 years after Jeff Lowe buys Joe's zoo, he skedaddles back to Las Vegas. He starts a business there charging folks to pet tiger cubs. But Jeff still has a man on the ground in Oklahoma to keep an eye on things, Alan Glover.
Dan Toporowicz implied that Carole Baskin may have known Jeff Lowe for years and might have even sent him to buy the zoo. Ann will know about what happened because she was there. Let's talk about Alan.
All right. Well, first of all, I called him Accident Alan because he fell down all the time. He was always hurt. He was a liability at the zoo. Him and Joe fought all the time. Well, Jeff was in Las Vegas, so he was hoping Jeff was going to just stay in Vegas, but then Jeff had to go get himself arrested.
Jeff Lowe was arrested and charged in Las Vegas after he was caught running a high-end cub petting service without a license.
At his arrest, Lowe was caught in possession of firearms, which was illegal because he was a convicted felon.
Jeff Lowe gets arrested with firearms. He was a felon in possession of firearms in Las Vegas. The gun case has never been filed.
I just think that Jeff copped to the feds and was like, I'll make a deal with you. I'll give you Joe, but you let me go.
With no business left to run in Las Vegas, Jeff returns to the zoo. Joe and his friends think he came back with a plan.
That's when he was taking Joe down. Joseph had made the decision that he was leaving. I just want to go live my life with my new husband and have to do this no more.
Now, all I wanted to do was walk away, and they couldn't let me do that.
And Jeff went after him like a viper.
What has been done wrong to me by Jeff Lowe, this is wrong. Get me the hell out of here because I don't belong here.
When Jeff Lowe returns to the zoo in the fall of 2017, things go from bad to worse for Joe Exotic. Joe's steaming because he lost his zoo, and he blames Carole Baskin.
Jeff goes to Joe and he's like, hey, I have a guy who can take out Carole. And so that's where Alan Glover comes in.
According to Jeff Lowe, Joe pays Alan Glover $3,000 to kill Carole Baskin, but the hit never happens.
That obviously failed because they're all criminals. And then Jeff's like, okay, well, I have this other dude who can do it.
Needless to say, Joe picks the wrong dude. The would-be hitman, who shows up in December 2017, is actually an undercover FBI agent with a hidden tape recorder.
According to the court records, Joe says to the agent, she's got to go, referring to Carole Baskin. The undercover agent tells Joe that a hit on Carole would cost $10,000, but no money is ever exchanged, and it's the agent who brings up the idea of murder for hire. On September 7, 2018, Joe Exotic is arrested for hiring a hitman to kill his sworn enemy, Carole Baskin.
Joe Exotic enters a not guilty plea in the murder for hire case against him.
He was very confident. He was going to walk out of that courtroom a free man. There was no question in his mind.
Federal U.S. Attorney's offices have a 98% conviction rate. 98.
The grand jury would not proceed until mid-July-ish because they didn't have enough evidence for a hitman for hire.
But federal authorities have more up their sleeves.
No question. They couldn't make the murder for hire. They couldn't make it. So they re-indicted the case on the eve of trial to include these fish and wildlife offenses.
U.S. Attorney's Office drops a kind of bombshell with new charges against the man known as Joe Exotic.
Among the 21 counts Maldonado Passage is facing, 19 are wildlife charges.
You have these murder for hire charges, and then you have these animal cruelty charges all glommed into one case. That is very unusual.
In March 2019, Joe Exotic is sitting in federal court. He's on trial, charged with attempted murder for hire, and violation of regulations protecting wild animals.
Prosecutors say Joe Exotic killed the tigers to make room for other tigers.
It's interesting. Usually the government starts off with their most serious charge, would be the murder counts. But how they started off was a little different.
Former park employees called to testify against him Monday include Eric Cowie.
They brought the long-haired guy, Eric, in, who loved the animals, who said he was with them when he had to put one down, and he cried on the stand.
I knew cats were getting shot. Because we discussed it all day long for, I want to say, even a day or two before that.
An animal abuser, that's the worst thing.
I think if we make him look bad enough, then they'll just find him guilty on everything.
I put 5 tigers to sleep because they were in pain. They had toenails coming out of their ankles. They had no teeth. They had exposed root canals.
The evidence that was found out later when they exhumed the tiger bodies did not show that there was anything wrong with any of those tigers. So in our minds, we're like, why were they put down? Money. The judge said, we're going to switch gears now. And now you're going to be hearing about the murder for hire.
3 days into the trial, the jury is presented with evidence from Joe Exotic's TV show.
Prosecutors used Joe Exotic's videos against him to support their murder for hire case.
If you're going to do it, you're not going to talk about it. You're just going to do it. You're not going to put it on the internet that you're going to kill somebody. No, you're just going to do it. Joe never had any intent or ability to carry that out.
Then Carole Baskin takes the stand as a witness for the prosecution.
In court, Baskin testified threats continued through 2017 and that she feared for her life.
To me, she did seem credible. She seemed passionate about animals, and she just seemed like a nice lady. I could tell she was upset and distraught, and I could understand her fear.
After a week-long trial, the prosecution rests without calling several people in Joe's inner circle.
The prosecutor had John Rinke on their list. They subpoenaed him. At the very last second, they cut him. He was the park manager for 14 years. He had a lot to say. He knows what happened. He was there.
There was nobody going to get hurt in this.
The former manager of Maldonado's Roadside Zoo spoke out Wednesday.
Did Joe do wrong? Yeah, I'm sure he did wrong. He did sell cubs. He did transport cubs. The murder for hire thing, I don't think it ever would have went this far without somebody pushing it.
One of the most important pieces to this entire case is the murder for hire and the $3,000 payment.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Bull.
Tell me why. Tell me why.
Bull. Okay, so Alan, the hitman, right? He just was a hot mess. And he worked for Jeff, and he made sure everybody knew he worked for Jeff. Him and Joseph went at it all the time because he hated Joe.
So the $3,000 payment.
The $3,000 was, really, it was just money to make him go home. Alan asked me to get the ticket. Like, he was like, because I fly all the time. So it was like, I got the ticket for him.
And the plane ticket was from where to where?
Oklahoma City to, I want to say South Carolina.
It's like, hey, please go. Here's some cash to get you through to get a next job. Take care. Have a nice day.
And that was Jeff told Joseph.
That's what Jeff told him.
Jeff told him to give him the money to get him out. Jeff couldn't stand the two of them fighting.
There are two different stories about the $3,000 that Alan Glover was given.
The $3,000 was a loan. Alan was going to pay it back when he went home.
But the prosecution said it was evidence of a crime.
And so at no time, you never heard Joe talking about giving him money to go down to Florida and kill Carole for $3,000.
He never ever. You're going to give this mook who can't even walk across the trail to his trailer without falling down and cracking his melon open, you're going to give him $3 grand to go kill somebody?
And Alan didn't even go to Florida. He went to South Carolina.
He was on the beach. All of a sudden, in July, Jeff and Alan decide, oh, well, Alan got paid $3,000 cash to go kill this woman.
Jeff Lowe releases audio recordings to the media after Joe's conviction.
Well, he's supposed to give me $5,000 cash to leave with. I'm thinking, yeah, that deserves you right for the you put me through, basically.
He wanted to leave the park. I wanted him out of my hair. Jeff was tired of hearing us both bitching. So Jeff told me to give him $3,000. So I gave him the $3,000. He was supposed to pay back the zoo when he got his Social Security check.
Jeff Lowe is the one who provided the money. You know, at that point, this park was no longer in Joe's control, it was in Jeff's control. So how does the owner of the park essentially walk away scot-free?
Jeff Lowe was after the zoo. That was in the design. Second, the opportunity presented itself when he got arrested. I think he cut a deal with the agents while he was in Las Vegas, which explains why his case has not proceeded. If I deliver for you, government, you're not going to file the case against me. So that's why you danced with the devil, to work off your own case. There's more and more evidence that Carole Baskin was in on it with Jeff Lowe.
We do know that Lowe was cooperating with the government and may have accepted a plea deal in exchange for his cooperation.
He's a prior felon. If he goes down for a felon in possession of firearms, that's just 5 years flat.
Throughout this trial, Joe maintained that Jeff Lowe set him up.
I didn't feel there was any collusion whatsoever to, quote, get him to hire someone to kill her.
There were so many different individuals that hated him, and it made sense for him to go away, that they all worked together. Jeff Lowe said it, gotcha.
Well, I've got it all, Joe. This much, I have it. You are so...
The jury deliberates for 4 hours in the case against Joe Maldonado Passage, a.k.a. Joe Exotic.
Jury came back finding Joseph Maldonado Passage guilty on all counts.
The evidence that was presented to us of all his wrongdoings stood on its own. It's solid, it's black and white, it's paper, it's video, it's audio. And so we literally poured through it and went through every piece of evidence and cross-referenced receipts and everything else, and we put it all together. And it made a nice little roadmap. None of the evidence we saw looked like it was a setup in any way, shape, or form. And you got to think, if anybody's going to sit there and say they're going to kill you,
You will stop breathing.
you might want to take that seriously. Even if you think they're joking around, still, take it seriously. At the reading of all the verdicts, and especially when we got to the 2 murder for hires, he was found guilty. I can remember him just shaking his head like, you know, he just thought it was a farce or thought it was a joke. And it's like, sorry, the evidence was there. The law is the law. You can't do what you're doing. Unfortunately, you got caught.
As an attorney, you win or lose your case when you pick your jury. There was enough there to create reasonable doubt as far as the murder for hire goes. But clearly they turned their back on it and decided to find him guilty of all charges.
I have not seen a visitor. I've not seen the outside in a year and a half. I've not seen my husband in a year and a half.
We talk like 3 to 5 times every day. If I'm trying to lift him up and stuff, I'll talk about our life after he gets out and, you know, what we have planned. And he wants me to look at houses and kind of get a place for us. Hope is the #1 thing for Joe. You know, if he doesn't have anything to be optimistic about or to see in his future, then he's not gonna mentally be able to stay sane and, you know, make it through the situation he's in. Joe's very hopeful that he will get out.
Joe was sentenced to 22 years, but if you look at the law and look at how other people have been sentenced, pretty harsh.
What they usually do is run your charges concurrent, side by side. But the judge stacked those charges.
22 years sentence. There's sex offenders with DNA and a confession across the street in the county jail. They got half of that.
That's a sentence. He's not going to be in prison for 22 years. I'm gonna guarantee you that. My name is Eric Love. I'm from Bedford, Texas. I'm a private investigator. I've been affiliated and working in law enforcement for the last 34 years. I have a daughter named Gabby. She says, oh my gosh, you've got to watch Joe Exotic. So a private investigator's mind looks at things maybe a little bit different than other folks. I started thinking about it and think, the case is full of injustices. And then Gabby says, Dad, why don't you look into this case? And I told her, I said, listen, he was wronged and we're going to right the wrong. I think we can get him out.
That's why Team Tiger was put together.
Jeff Hoover, nice to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you.
It's such an injustice that they just couldn't sit back and watch it. It is the absolute best of the best.
Thanks for coming, and what got you interested in putting all your time into this?
I like complex cases. I like helping out, and I like working. And
you're in it for the
just
money?
seem to be- I'm not making a dime. I do this because I truly enjoy investigating, but I like helping out.
I want to right wrongs. If there is a wrong available to be righted, I want to do that.
He's the one that brought the team together, actually.
I wrote Joe a letter, and he immediately responded with, Eric, I desperately need your help. And then Ann called me, the power of attorney. And at this point, I knew I had a full basket and I've got to get some help, right? Then I called Francisco and I said, I've got a case for you.
Yeah, you did.
That's exactly how it happened.
It's interesting how they did this whole case. When they did the prosecution, they actually did the Tiger aspect of things first, right?
That was for shock and awe.
Right. To kind of cast that shadow over Joe
The
and
monster.
then go for the
And
murder
did you
for hire.
catch, on cross-examination, they asked the USDA officer, how many of these have been prosecuted to your knowledge? This one.
Just the one.
If you look at his court records, you'll scratch your head. We think there's incompetence. We think there's collusion. When I called Francisco and we discussed it, I said, look, Joe was targeted. He's incarcerated. He's not guilty of what he's charged with. This is a presidential pardon case. And when we lay out that case, we feel that the president will side with us and we'll get the pardon. Because anybody can be a victim of what Joe was a victim of.
Oh, anybody could. Absolutely.
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 There's not just one Joe out there. There's more Joes out there. You understand? If you go fight Goliath, you better have some ammunition.
The defense was prohibited from bringing any information about Carole Baskin. The question here to investigate is, was there any collusion or cooperation between Carole Baskin and Jeff Lowe?
Wouldn't even put Jeff Lowe up there.
Wouldn't even let them talk about Jeff.
We have reason to believe that Jeff Lowe was in fact setting up Joe months before this happened, and that he in fact had communication with Carole Baskin. The defense was precluded from impeaching her credibility with matters about her husband because it didn't seem to be relevant.
Well, I'm definitely going to do everything I can on my end. I'm working the Don Lewis case very hard, but I'm also going to be trying to connect the dots and help out your team out here and be able to provide you some information or whatever else that I can find that's going to help you in your case.
Well, you have 50 million fans hoping you find something to help us.
Yeah, hope so too. Well, thank you guys so very much for having me out here, and I look forward to being in touch soon.
The team's ultimate goal is for Joe to have freedom, and we'd like it pretty quick.
Appeals or writs, post-conviction, anything that's post-conviction, it's not easy to get things overturned. You really have to convince the appellate court that an egregious error did happen, or something was kept out that should have come in and it would have made a huge difference and the jury would have maybe found him not guilty.
I think the defense probably did the best that they could with what they had. But now looking back on it, you continue to find error after error after error. When you find a continuous amount of errors, you need to re-examine that case. You need to re-examine, did they actually convict this person off all the right reasons? Or was he wrongfully convicted and has a chance to freedom again? After meeting with Team Tiger, I'm more convinced than ever that there's a lot more to this story. And clearly, I'm not alone in thinking that.
Hi, everyone. This is Trisha Griffith with Web Sleuths Radio Podcast. If something doesn't make sense on paper, if you look at it and go, why did that happen? There's a reason. My name is Trisha Griffith, and I am the owner of WebSleuths.com, host of Web Sleuths Radio Podcast and Web Sleuths YouTube Live. Web Sleuths is a place for people to gather on the internet to discuss true crime. We have time, and we have the ability to go look in places that law enforcement departments can't. Joe Exotic became a phenomenon, and everybody surrounding Joe Exotic. And people started looking into Carole Baskin, missing husband, and then finding out that her husband had supposedly literally flown away, never to be seen again. We all went, no, there's something really wrong here. Before he went behind bars. Joe Exotic really did raise the alarm bells when it came to Don Lewis being missing.
We have airboats, we have helicopters, and we are looking for Don.
Constantly saying that Don was ground up and fed to the tigers. And maybe Carole needed Joe Exotic to stop talking. And maybe he is close to the truth, but he's the only one behind bars.
When I first started hearing about the Don Lewis disappearance, I felt terrible for Don Lewis's family. I can't imagine what it was like for them for the last 23 years of their lives to not have a clue of what happened to their father. He just disappeared. He left behind all of his animals, his fortune, his businesses, and everything has just gone. Like, he just hasn't come back. I recently lost my father, so you kind of have that added drive to really find out what has happened to Don Lewis and try to get them some sort of answers that they don't have. It's a pure mystery. Trisha Griffith has been in contact with so many of the key players involved in the disappearance of Don Lewis. I'm glad you're taking some time to talk to me about this. This is quite the case.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever see anything like this in our lifetimes, in our children's lifetimes.
So you had a chance to talk to some key players recently.
Specifically, I talked to Ann McQueen. And Ann worked for Don for many, many years. She really was one of his trusted, I would say, advisors, trusted people. And in the end, she was the trustee, executor of the wills and the trusts.
Right.
She had the keys to the kingdom. And Ann said a couple of months before he disappeared, Don comes in and he gives her an envelope. It's sealed. He says, I want you to hold on to this. You'll know what to do with it someday if you need to.
Right.
He said, don't open it. And that Friday, when she called him and she couldn't find him, she knew.
So you're talking about August 15th of 1997, right? Friday?
August 15th, 1997. Apparently, Don and Carole had such a big fuss that Don went to sleep in the trailer itself of an 18-wheeler. He didn't look like he slept. In fact, she said he looked like hell. And that's when he said, I'm done with it. I'm going to go back. I'm going to tell Carole it's over. I'm done. I'm getting a divorce today. Ann tried to call Don just a couple of hours after he left that morning. And then in the afternoon. And then at night, all through the night. Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon. Now she's panicked. She finally calls Carole Sunday and said, I'm really worried about Don. And Carole goes, oh, well, he does that all the time. He leaves and doesn't tell anybody. And Ann's like, no, he doesn't. Carole said that she saw him that Sunday morning, but he didn't go to church with her. And she went to church with Kenny, the handyman. So then Carole says, well, gosh, do you think I should call the sheriff? And Ann said, do you think?
Carole and Ann McQueen have publicly disagreed about the circumstances surrounding Don's disappearance.
Ann claims Don always told her where he was, but again, there are several times when she called me because she couldn't find him for days on end. Her sarcasm about me not calling the police until the next day was unwarranted.
Carole files a missing persons report with the sheriff's office after talking with Ann. According to law enforcement records, Don Lewis disappears on Monday, August 18th, 1997. Carole says she saw him head out of the house that morning and never saw him again.
A week later, Ann gets a call from the security company that says our alarms are going off. Now, Ann at this time was down at the sheriff's office going to talk to them about Don, and she couldn't leave. And so she told the security company, call the police. And they get there, and Carole and Ken Farr have removed everything. Every file gone. That was the last time. They never went back to the office. Their jobs were over.
The code for the alarm that Ann gave me the night before must have been changed because we could not shut off the alarm and the police arrived.
Remember the envelope that Don had given Ann a couple of months before?
That, yeah.
She gets it. She opens it. She said her knees just buckled. It was the restraining order application that Don tried to get against Carole, but it was denied by the judge. It was tough for women to get restraining orders. Men, I'm sure almost impossible.
In that restraining order, it said in there 2 times in their relationship, she's made some sort of threat against his life.
I never threatened to kill Don. He called me his guardian angel because I was always the one protecting him.
At this point, Ann McQueen still thinks she's Don's power of attorney. She's about to get a surprise.
In the end, Ann McQueen was the trustee, executor of the wills and the trusts.
Right.
Carole doesn't trust Ann McQueen and publicly accuses her of embezzlement, a claim Ann denies.
Carole comes waltzing into court with the document.
Right.
The power of attorney. The document said, in case of my disappearance, my power of attorney will be Carole. Who writes, in case of my disappearance? Nobody puts that in a power of attorney.
Ann McQueen believes she holds the power of attorney for Don Lewis's estate. Then his wife, Carole, shows up with a new piece of paper that changes everything. A later dated form that names her as power of attorney.
The person who had the most to gain would have been Carole. She now was able to collect all of Don's properties. She put herself ahead of all the trusts, and she made millions upon millions of dollars from that. So I wanted to have an expert look at the power of attorney and the will. Thomas Vastrick is a handwriting expert.
Hey, Thomas, how are you?
Jim. Many years of experience in examining documents, all different types, for signatures, for frauds. He's worked with the United States Postal Service. He wants to know it's either it is or it is not a forgery.
When I looked at Mr. Lewis's signature on both the last will and testament and the durable family power of attorney, I noticed that the signatures were too similar to be normal. If you write your name 10 times, or even just 2 times, you'll notice differences between each signature. It's called natural variation because it's natural. And I noticed in these a lack of variance. And that, to me, in my opinion, is a telltale sign of an attempt to trace. That raises the specter of, can we find a signature that was used as the basis for the tracing? So I found this marriage record. This marriage record is dated in 1991, 5 years before the will and the power of attorney. This was the document that contained the Lewis signature that was used as the model. I created a little illustration that shows the signatures from the will on the top 2 samples, then the signature from the power of attorney, and then from the marriage record. There's just a very strong similar appearance to these, more so than you would expect to find between any 2 random signatures by the same person. And if you look at the word Donald, it looks like it's spelled with an E instead of an A. And I found this mistake in all of these signatures. Now, you can look and find a couple differences between each of the signatures, and that's fine.
Right.
But this near exact replication is just classic evidence of a tracing.
What about the notaries or the witnesses you have?
I have samples of each of them, and I find the same pattern. I cannot say that all 3 of these are tracings. I can say that, in my opinion, at least 2 of them are. Because one of these could be the model signature for all I know.
Wow, that's powerful. So it's, I want to say impossible, but it's near impossible for somebody to have the exact same signature to a T, and period, if they sign their name thousands of times. But here it is, we actually have the same signature within a 5-year period.
For 4 different people.
For 4 different people. What are the chances of that?
I'm not a statistician, but I think I'd have to use exponential numbers to explain that.
Agreed.
Carole says she gathered the witness and the notary to the documents.
All of the witnesses and notary on the documents provided affidavits stating that they saw Don sign them and that he understood what he signed and that he was competent to do so.
This kind of can be a game changer. Obviously, this was used in the civil aspect of things, which awarded her all the finances. On a criminal side, it's really big for the sheriff's office to have this information in the state attorney's office on what direction they're going to go. So not only do they have the person who would have done this tracing, it also gives them a notary to speak with and 2 witnesses as well. So you actually have multiple people involved with the signing of this to interview and that need to testify as to what had actually happened. We already know that there was a restraining order that had happened 2 months prior to his disappearance. We also know that he was getting ready to go through a divorce. If this was actually done prior to his actual disappearance and it was part of the plan, it could show premeditation and murder. With this, there was a lot of properties that were gained. Over the years, these properties have been sold. If this is actually tracing, it's going to cause a lot of legal concerns for all those people that have bought properties, transferred properties. Technically, they never owned them legally.
On June 3rd, 2020, Sheriff Chronister of Hillsborough County has an important announcement about Don Lewis's will.
The will was a forgery. 2 experts deem it 100% a forgery. This certainly casts another shadow of suspicion.
Do I believe he's been killed, that he's dead? Yes, I do. Do I know who did it and how he died? That I don't know. But certainly there's a lot of suspicions, and we will do whatever would be required to solve this case.
The reopening of this investigation is really, really exciting. I feel like I'm on the right path.
We're receiving on average 6 tips a day. Anything that's viable, we're going to pursue. There's nothing more important to us than bringing justice to his family.
All these theories about what happened to Don Lewis and the insinuations about Carole Baskin has sent Jim Rathman on a quest for answers. Did Don Lewis make a business deal that went south? Did he disappear to Costa Rica like some folks think? Could Don have cooked up this whole crazy thing on his own? Or was it murder?
I'm on a mission to get to the bottom of what the truth is, to be able to solve this Don Lewis case, find out who was involved and what really happened.
According to Sheriff Chronister, experts have determined that Don Lewis's will and power of attorney are forgeries. All of a sudden, a 23-year-old missing persons cold case is on the front burner. Don's wife, Carole, always claimed she believed he flew off in his plane, never to be seen again.
Lewis was last seen 9 days ago here at Pasco's Pilot Country Estates, shopping for ultralight and experimental planes, apparently for export to Central America.
Don Lewis was a multimillionaire from Tampa, Florida. He made his wealth in the real estate, kind of flipping homes, buying up mortgages, things like that. But he also had a passion for exotic animals. And so he had a sanctuary called Wildlife on Easy Street. He had well over 100 cats, lions, tigers, leopards.
I would call him a modern-day hippie. I never saw him get mad. I never saw him raise his voice. Had a head for business and a deal.
In January 1981, Don's living with his wife Gladys, their 3 daughters, and a son. When he meets Carole, she's in a bad place in life, running away from her husband Michael Murdoch, the father of her daughter, Jamie. Something clicks between Don and Carole and keeps on clicking. They carry on a 10-year affair until Don divorces Gladys and they get married in 1991. They seemed happy despite their age difference. They did real estate deals and started collecting bobcats. Eventually, they turned Wildlife on Easy Street into a business that breeds and sells exotic animals.
We've got 4 kitties we're going to feed. They're quite anxious, as you can hear.
Don cared greatly for his cats, and that was his passion. He loved it, but he also liked to go to Costa Rica.
Costa Rica used to have quite a vibrant trade in exotic animals with very, very little regulation, where here we have tremendous regulation of it.
And then in 1997, he just disappeared.
In recent months, Lewis's wife says he'd begun to show signs of early Alzheimer's. He'd even accidentally, she says, leave cages open, and some of his beloved cats had escaped.
I'm very worried, but I don't feel that separation. It's feeling that helps me to hang on and think that he is okay, that he will just walk back in the gate.
3 weeks after Dawn goes missing on August 18, 1997, Carole shows up in court with power of attorney form that the sheriff now claims is forged, giving her control of Dawn's fortune.
A power of attorney dies with the person. You cannot administer their estate past their death with the power of attorney. The question becomes, why do you have a power of attorney and a will? Power of attorney, if you don't find the body, will if you do.
In her video diaries, Carole explains why Dawn wanted her to draft a new power of attorney.
He said he wants to make sure I am always taken care of, and he even had me draft a will and a power of attorney. He had me change the will a few times because he seemed to just delight in making sure that none of his greedy kids, as he said, were in it.
Carole now rules over an estate worth around $7 million.
And we now know that before Don disappeared, he was living in fear. June 12th of 1997, Don Lewis actually went and filed the restraining order against Carole Lewis, known today as Carole Baskin. She had access to a pistol. He felt that his life was in jeopardy. So the statement reads, "This is the second time Carole has got angry enough to threaten to kill me. Me and Carole got in a big fuss, and she ordered me out of the house or she would kill me. And if I came back, she would kill me. She has a revolver, and she took my .357 and hid it." It's an important piece of evidence because it actually shows that there were some issues within this marriage, and that the marriage, it was also getting violent.
He tried to get a protective order. He couldn't get it. It got turned down for whatever reasons it got turned down. Then he told her he was going to divorce her, and she freaked out.
What I'm upset about is that he didn't come talk to me before he did it. I see every day people that file an injunction that's not granted, where it could have been granted had an attorney set the stage properly.
Now, according to everybody that I spoke with, Don was not too fond of taking anything to the sheriff's department or law enforcement, period. So the fact that he went and to do that for a restraining order is quite suspicious, that he felt like his life was going to be in danger.
How many protective orders do you see filed by a man against the wife? I've never seen one in 30 years as a lawyer. And then he disappears.
August 20th of 1997, Don Lewis's van was found at the Pilot Country Airport, which is north of Tampa. So this van was found about a day after Don Lewis was reported missing. A lot of the theories that were circulating with the van being left at the airport is that Don went ahead and got in a private plane and flew to Costa Rica. Perhaps he crashed his airplane in the Gulf of Mexico.
When they find Don's van, the sheriff's office wants to search Carole's property, but she says no. She also declines to take a polygraph.
Refusing to take a polygraph means that Carole had a pretty good lawyer, because there's no benefit for her to take a polygraph. While it's not indicative of guilt or innocence, it's a method that a truly trained person can tell you if they're lying. Most of the times, it's not in their best interest.
I'm on my way to meet one of the last people to see Don Lewis alive. Dale Lively was the mechanic that worked many years with Don Lewis. It was just his go-to person to fix all of his vehicles. He worked on Don's van just a few days before Don disappeared. I'm sure he has some information to share with us.
Dale. Hey, Jim. How you doing?
How are you? If you wouldn't mind, tell me when we have that van in here for, about when, and whenabouts was that?
The last time I worked on it was a week before he disappeared. I had it in here for 2 or 3 days doing some air conditioning work on the dash. And so I had all the dash and everything out of it. and got it all fixed.
And then he
called Don, and he came out here that day, and he spent about an hour here.
Okay.
He was talking about Costa Rica. He told me that he was getting ready and he was going to move his cats down there. And
like all the cats from the wildlife on Easy Street?
Right. That's what he wanted to do.
Did you think maybe he was getting ready to transition his life into a different role than...
I think so, but Don liked to be around his kids, and then he got into a discussion talking about Carole.
Can you tell me about that?
I didn't know there was problems going on, but he was afraid of her, and he had tried to get a restraining order out on her, and he was afraid she was going to kill him, and that he just had to get away from her. You know, you don't really think a whole lot about it when somebody tells you that, but then when the situation came up like it did, it kind of makes you think. And then he tried his best to get me to go to Costa Rica with him that weekend.
Did he?
He said, you'll love it, the people are nice, it's beautiful, but I wasn't able to go.
What about his mental state? What do you, because I know there's been a lot of talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the stories that Carole said that he had dementia and Alzheimer's. I never saw a single thing about that. Don was just as sharp as he ever was.
Don Lewis was much older than Carole, but still fairly young to be suffering from dementia. Were there early warning signs that only Carole could see?
So being that you knew him all those years,
you never saw no change whatsoever.
So let's talk a little bit about the van. He's getting ready to drive that, and it was Don that drove that van off, right?
Don drove it off.
And when they found his van, the van was released back to Carole.
To Carole, yeah.
And Carole drove it back to the sanctuary, and it was processed a few days later. The sheriff's office comes out, they find a fingerprint. Whose fingerprint did they find?
Mine.
Where did they find it?
It was on the center part of the dash where I was working, yeah.
So that was the only print that they found?
Yeah,
right?
But they didn't find any on the steering wheel or anywhere else. The door handles, Carole drove it back. Why weren't her prints on it?
Agreed.
You know, her prints should have been all over the steering wheel.
And so should Don's.
Yeah, Don should have too if he drove it.
Exactly. What did that signify to you?
Someone had to have wiped the van down. They should have found my fingerprints on the doors, on the steering wheel, both doors, because I was all over the van. If Carole drove it back from the airport, why weren't her prints in the van, unless she either wore gloves or wiped it down?
Two detectives are here to talk to you essentially as a person of interest.
I was able to explain why my prints were in there. I had the dash all apart. I said, you should have found it all over the thing.
And what did they say to that?
Not a word. They spent about 10, 15 minutes and they left. I never heard from them again.
It's like check the block, we talked to them.
Exactly.
What do you think happened to your friend Don?
I think Don is still here in Florida somewhere, but they just haven't found him yet.
Carole seemed to support the idea that Don had flown off in a plane and possibly crashed.
He's really a very good pilot, despite his licensing problems.
Former airline pilot Wayne Pym was Lewis's flight instructor. Pym's logbooks show Lewis never got his license.
Wayne Pym taught Don Lewis about flying, or at least attempted to teach him about flying. Wayne reached out to me a little while back. He told me that he had some information about Don that other people don't have. And hopefully we can get some new leads, along with proving and disproving some of the theories that are out there.
About what year was it when you first met Don? 1985. I started teaching him. He, around that time, started buying and selling a lot of airplanes. Every time I turned around, he was showing me another airplane he had just bought.
What kind of plane did Don Lewis fly?
Mostly light aircraft. This is similar to one of the aircraft he might have been flying in. Single engine, back seat, fairly cramped.
But how many miles can you actually go on a full tank of gas?
500 miles.
But you most certainly couldn't go all the way to Costa Rica.
Non-stop, no way.
So essentially the theory of him taking off from the Pilot Country Airport where his van was found and flying that to Costa Rica wouldn't be a likely scenario without him landing somewhere.
I highly doubt that scenario.
Even when Don did fly, he had a little trouble staying airborne.
Do you recall him having a plane crash? The biggest one I know about was the one in Cedar Key. He was having some problems with the engine and apparently tried to land at Cedar Key and came up short and ended up in shallow water a few miles off of Cedar Key.
And was that the only crash you ever had?
Yeah, I know of another one up in the Panhandle. Got caught in some bad weather. In making the approach to the field, he didn't see some power lines that ran across his approach path and hit the power lines. That second crash was considerably more serious, and he was very lucky to have survived.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I've also heard about the third crash. From what I understand, that was in the early 90s. After that third crash, he was done flying, and he had no intention to fly anymore.
Don never did get a pilot's license. Multiple sources say he gave up piloting and had not personally flown an aircraft for years before he disappeared.
How did you hear of Don disappearing?
News report.
What was your initial thought?
I didn't have knowledge that at that time that he had quit flying, so my logical conclusion was that he went to the airport, took off, and possibly crashed.
What do you think happened to Don?
I think there was foul play, yeah. I do.
Do you think an airplane's even involved at all?
I don't think an airplane was involved. I think it was a convenient ruse to make, like I did, and the police did. They automatically thought, well, he took off and crashed.
August 20th, 1997, about 4:30 in the morning, Don Lewis's van is found at the Pilot Country Airport. What can you tell me about that?
The gentleman that reported the van, his name was Dewey Gallops. He was the person that ran Pilot Country Estates. And then I recently learned that Dewey and Don had some sort of a falling out about some airplanes that were on consignment at Dewey's airport. And that some airplanes, or an airplane, was sold at a considerable loss, and Don was upset about it. And because of that, he pulled what airplanes he had from the airport and vowed to never return to that airport again. Based on other people that knew Don, they said absolutely no way he would have set foot on that airport.
If Don Lewis had a falling out with somebody at that airport, a couple $100,000 were lost, and that wasn't the airport he typically went to, then why was his van there? Seems to me like somebody's just trying to set the stage to distract from the real investigation or where they really need to be looking. Right now we are headed to go see Mr. Joe Fritz. Used to be one of Don Lewis's attorneys. He actually has claimed to have heard what happened to Don Lewis. How do you know Don Lewis? How long have you guys known each other, of course?
Before he went missing, probably 8, 10 years.
So clearly you guys built a friendship over that 10 years.
Yeah. I have pictures of my son and I out at his place. My son covered up in bobcats.
When was the last time you recall seeing Don Lewis alive?
It would have been within 10 days of his disappearance.
Did you know that he was having issues with Carole?
The only thing I remember was I was in that era asked who would I recommend as a divorce attorney.
So he asked you for a recommendation?
No, he did not. Ann McQueen did.
Ann McQueen did. Okay. What do you think happened to your friend Don?
I had heard that he got strangled with an electric cord from the back seat of this airplane with somebody else flying and got dumped out over the Gulf.
Don Lewis's lawyer just dropped a bombshell. He claims Don didn't fly off into the sunset. He heard that Don was strangled with an electric cord and dumped into the Gulf of Mexico.
First of all, I heard it from 2 different sources. It kind of fits the scenario. Because he was a pilot, he'd owned planes. He had a license. He lost his license. His van is at Country Pilot Estates. It's an unmanned airport. Nobody logs you in, nobody logs you out. It's not unusual for somebody to take off in a plane. So it all fits together. He got lured up there to do a great deal on an airplane. He showed up. Our Sheriff Conister says there's more than one person's involved. Yes, he's right. No question in my mind that this was a murder. The question is who did it and who's behind it.
Is it even possible to throw somebody out in flight? If you had to open that door going against 120, 140 knots and trying to force that door open and push out a person that you would say at least weighed 150, 160 pounds, that would have been very challenging.
A lot of Dawn Lewis's friends support the idea that Dawn and Carol's marriage was coming to an end. So Jim digs in with Tricia Griffith, who has recently unearthed an odd letter that Carole wrote to Dawn's ex-wife in 1990.
I am good. My eyes are kind of rolling back in my head like a slot machine because I've been trying to grasp this letter that Carole Baskin wrote to Dawn Lewis's wife in 1990.
I just started reading it, and I got some into it, and I'm trying to make sense of this.
I mean, who writes an 11-page, single-spaced letter to the wife of the man that you've been having an affair with for years?
So what I found interesting is that on page 4, it says, "Perhaps I asked for too much, but I had to get out of my marriage and would have eventually killed my husband to do it." So she's literally talking about her ex-husband, Michael Murdoch, in August 20th of 1990, talking about she would kill him to get out of the marriage, Tricia. This is of August 20th of 1990, just 7 years later. Dawn Lewis mysteriously disappears, and she's talking about she would have killed her husband to get out of the marriage. You know, Tricia, in one of her video diaries, she actually validates this letter.
If I had been choking to death and the only way out was to grab a pair of scissors and stab him in the eye, that might have resulted in his death. I was not implying cold-blooded murder.
You've got to go back and find somebody that knew her to figure out her frame of mind.
I agree with you, and I'm definitely going to see what I can do about finding someone back in that time that would have known her to really be able to speak to her behavior, her mannerisms, her thought process.
Carole may have been itching to get out of her abusive marriage with Michael Murdoch. So was her letter to Gladys reflective of her mindset, or was it a symbol of her frustration?
I need to talk to someone who knew Carole in the 1990s to try to understand what she was like on an emotional level. Todd Schreier is the son of Alan Schreier. Alan actually dated Carole Lewis about 2 years after Dawn Lewis went missing. Todd ended up moving in with Carole Lewis and his father, Alan. So when you moved in, what was that experience like for you?
I was a sophomore in high school. Like, my dad is pretty laid back and easygoing, and he's very emotional, very loving. Carole is not. She's cold, she's distant, she very much blatantly doesn't like people.
It seems odd. There's more love for the animals than there are for the human beings that are surrounded in her life.
The rules are ridiculous. What do you mean I'm not allowed on a side of the whole house?
So you really weren't allowed to go to certain sections of the house. You had to pretty much stay in your living quarter area and just stay there the whole time.
Yeah.
And you weren't allowed to have friends over? You weren't allowed to...
No. So Carole was very, very private. She didn't want me there. She was the reason I had to move out. And I lived with my grandma the rest of high school.
When about is it that you find out that her husband became missing?
So I think my dad eased me into it. And it was like, hey, there's a rumor that Carole fed Dawn to the tigers. And it's satire, it's outrageous. But whatever you do, don't ever bring it up. You know, I think Carole's a bitch. I don't think Carole killed her husband.
If you had to guess, and your best guess, what do you think would have happened to him?
I think you should be spending time in Costa Rica. There was a lot of land, and I think the end goal was Costa Rica, and he had a lot of affiliation in Costa Rica. And so I think there's answers in Costa Rica.
So your dad, or is there any way at all you could facilitate this meeting and connect?
I'll tell you what, I'll give him a call, see if I can put you guys together.
I really want to speak with Alan Schreier because he can really give me some insight. Not to mention at some point or another, he's going to have to ask her, what happened to your husband?
Come on in.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
You met Carole in 1999, right?
Correct.
How did you guys meet?
I was on a lot of dating apps, and Match.com, she answered it. So she called me up and she says, if you want to see what I look like, you can buy this week's edition of People magazine. I'm the featured article. So at first I thought it was one of my friends screwing around with me because we're practical jokers.
Right.
But I found that it was the truth. So we met and we hit it off.
And you were in the real estate world, right?
Yeah, I owned about 50 or 60 homes.
Okay.
I'd buy them, fix them, sell them, or rent them. Carole, she was the smartest person I ever met. You know, when you make money and you do things, people try to take it from you. A lot of people came out with some really frivolous lawsuits and so forth. She was 19-0 or 20-0 in the court beating these people. She wouldn't hire an attorney and pay him. She researched it, read it, and did it herself. I think she's ruthless in her business. If you get in her way, she's going to come after you.
About how long into your relationship with her did she talk about Don?
Shortly thereafter, you know, everybody was asking me, everybody read that article. I don't know if you ever saw that article in the People magazine. Did she feed him to the tigers and so forth and so on? And, you know, I asked her, I came out and asked her, and she says no. She told me he was a very unscrupulous person. He did some things that were crossed the gray line and so forth. She told me that towards the end of his life, he would do dumpster diving, wouldn't know where he is, and she had to go pick him up in a car. And the other thing is he always used to carry $5,000 or $10,000 around with him. That's asking for trouble.
So basically she was letting you know that he mentally wasn't all there.
Yeah.
Did she ever say what she suspected had happened?
She suspected that, you know, the people that he was hanging around with, maybe he owed somebody some money and did something and they, you know, took care of him.
Did she ever say that she was still concerned for him since he wasn't found?
When I met her, it was almost 2 years since he disappeared, and we were together like 2 years and 3 months, something like that. We split up before the 5 years was up, and that's when everything hit the fan, when I guess she went there and declared him dead and got everything.
5 years after Dawn goes missing, Carole has Dawn legally declared dead, which gives her control over the estate and all his assets.
Carole told me that Don did not speak to his ex-wife or his kids for several years. Couldn't stand him, didn't care if he ever saw him at all. And he wanted Carole to change a will or change something, and so they weren't going to get anything. And I guess Carole did. Then all of a sudden, after he missing or passed or whatever, Carole, they were really bad-mouthing Carole to the paper and anybody that would ever listen. And she's, listen, I was going to give you 10%, but if you're going to talk to me like that, I'm not giving you anything.
Right. So is there anything else you could share with me about Carole?
She did not care for my son or people. A lot of people she didn't care for.
Your son, Todd, was about how old about this time?
I want to say about 15. He moved in with us because he had a problem with his stepfather. But I knew from the get-go, Carole doesn't like people. Carole likes cats. And when my son had to move in, he had nowhere to go. So he moved in with me. She was not happy with that. There was a strict set of rules. Okay. Don't come on our side of the house. This is your room. This is your bathroom. He did not like her at all.
Okay.
She was cold, and you know, it was awkward. Never a conversation. She'd be in the same room, wouldn't say anything. Made him feel very uncomfortable.
Okay.
Now, Carole has a daughter of her own by her first husband, and this mother-daughter relationship sounds complicated.
Carole's daughter, her name is Jamie.
Yes.
And Jamie was about how old at that time?
Jamie was a little older than my son, probably about 18.
Did Carole spend a lot of time with Jamie?
At work. To me, it's a strange relationship, you know.
So where was she living at the time when you first moved in?
On the Sanctuary. There was a house on the Sanctuary, and Carole had a house about 3 miles from there. Jamie's relationship with her mother was very distant.
You know, the lack of emotion, the lack of empathy, the lack of that personal connection with somebody, I find that to be very odd. Did you ever have maybe any indication as to, like, maybe your own internal alarm going off that maybe she could have been involved with his disappearance?
Interesting question. When I first was with her, the answer was 99.9%. I was sure she didn't do it.
Okay.
Now I'm 50-50.
And what made you kind of change your stance a little bit?
The will. I really believe in my heart she forged the will and so forth, some other things.
And what do you think happened to Don? Do you still think that's something with maybe one of his business dealings went awry?
I do and I don't. I do, okay, because it makes sense. But the person that did this was very good cleaning up. 20 years they can't find, they don't have a clue.
Very calculated.
There was one more thing she did, I found out. I used to have a lot of properties, and the lady said, did you sell some property in Costa Rica? I said, no. I don't know anybody in Costa Rica.
So she did a transaction without your knowledge?
Right.
Using your name?
It didn't hurt me at all, money-wise or anything like that.
She just used your name?
Yeah.
Is there anyone we should speak with that comes to mind that would have some information to share, perhaps on what happened to Don?
There was a guy, Kenny Farr. He used to be Don's gopher.
Mm-hmm.
And then after he was missing, became Carole's gopher. But I knew he came from the wrong side of the tracks.
This is the second time Don's handyman, Kenny Farr, has come up in this investigation.
Carole said that she saw Don that Sunday morning, but he didn't go to church with her. She went to church with Kenny, the handyman.
Thank you again, Alan.
All right, you take care.
Have a great day.
All right.
Alan said Carole made a transaction without his knowledge, but I can't find a record of it. After talking to Alan, it's clear I need to look at Kenny Farr more closely. And Tricia lets me know that she dug up some more documents that are very intriguing.
Carole and Kenny were close, very close. Shortly after Don went missing, she sold him all of this very valuable property, money-generating property.
And he gets 3 properties for a total of $9,080.
But these properties were worth a whole lot more than that.
They have trailers on them where he gets income.
Why would Carole give up valuable properties to Don's handyman for under market value?
Investigators are always told, follow the money. In this case, the trail seems to lead to Kenny Farr.
Kenny Farr was Don Lewis's handyman. So he helped build cages, fix and repair miscellaneous items that would break throughout the sanctuary. September of 1997, it was actually just a month and a few days after Don Lewis disappeared, property transactions were sold to the handyman, Kenny Farr, for way less than what they're worth, which is highly suspicious because these properties were money-generating properties. They had people living on these properties that were paying rent. They had a trailer on there. So not only was he sold the property itself, but he was also sold the money-generating aspect of it. These were estimated to be at about $50,000 a piece, and he was sold 3 of those only 1 month after Don Lewis disappeared. He was given about $150,000 worth of properties.
Why would Carole give up valuable properties to Don's handyman?
I couldn't help but wonder if this could be some sort of payoff. I have been able to speak with his now ex-wife, Trish, on the phone. Some of the information she told me I wasn't expecting.
Kenny worked every day of the week. He was a workaholic.
7 days a week, wow.
Never took vacations, he just worked. So for him to be home was absolutely out of the norm. It didn't happen.
Trish stated that on that particular day he was home, he got a phone call and a page at approximately 1 p.m. on August 17th of 1997.
This is the very same day that Don disappeared.
The bedroom door flies open and Kenny walked down the hallway with the beeper in his hand and grabbed the phone. So I just, assumed that he was expecting a call. I noticed somebody pulled up outside.
A person showed up at the residence. She's unsure of exactly which person it is. Kenny Farr then left with this person.
Kenny went straight out the front door and he left.
It's like he was in a hurry. He was in a panic to get out of the house. This is on Sunday, August 17th of 1997, 2 days before Don Lewis was officially reported missing.
Later that night, about 11, 12 o'clock, Kenny shows back up, but he has one of Don's vans. He said, help me with these, and he pulled back a blanket, and there was stacks of guns. There were so many guns. Guns
Pistols and rifles, or?
Pistols, rifles, antique guns, powder gun, walking cane-looking guns.
Oh, wow.
All kinds of unique guns. I was like, whoa, what are you doing with these? And he said, listen, I'm holding on to them right now. Help me carry him inside. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, listen, Don's gone. Nobody knows where he's at, and I don't want you talking about him to anybody.
2 days prior to him being reported missing, and now somebody else already knows that he's missing with all of the firearms, it's highly suspicious.
He said, listen, don't talk about Don. Don't talk about him at all. Anybody ask you about him, don't say anything. Our phone could be tapped. And wow. I'm like, what do you mean our phone could be capped? What the hell are you talking about? He said, yeah, I'm serious. He said, I'm not going to discuss it. I'm just letting you know. I don't need to talk about him. Going ahead a few days forward, I'm in the kitchen, and the news is coming on, and I hear Tampa multimillionaire Jack Donald Lewis missing on August 18th. And I thought, what was this? I did ask Kenny, you didn't have anything to do with Dawn not showing up anywhere or disappearing, did you? And he told me, you know, don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. So I was just like, all right, well, yeah, I don't want to know. But deep down, I already know.
What do you think they did with Dawn after that then?
I think they disposed of him somehow, some manner. I can tell you what Kenny told me when he had me down one night when I was trying to leave him. He kind of straddled me and had his hand in the back of my hair, and he was pulling my head back, and he told me that if you try to leave me one more time, I swear to you, you're going to end up just like Dawn did in the meat grinder. He grabbed a hold of my arm and he shoved me to the ground.
I can't believe what I just heard from the ex-wife of Don and Carole Lewis's handyman. It's mind-blowing.
After Trish tries to leave him, she claims that Kenny Farr threatens that she'll end up in a meat grinder, just like Dawn Lewis.
Why would you come up with some crazy thought like that?
It wouldn't be a first thought for many people unless you have some sort of experience with it.
Right.
Trish explains that it's a piece of equipment found at most zoos, and wildlife on Easy Street was no exception.
So they had a meat grinder?
Yeah, it was one of these big ones that like, they use in meat plants, you know. Like,
so an industrial-sized meat grinder.
It was huge. It was one they pulled around with a golf cart.
It would be possible to put a body into that then. It would be big enough.
And they actually had two out there, I believe. One I know went to Tampa Machinery Auction because I found the receipt in Kenny's pants, and it went to the auction about the second week of September that year.
Joe Exotic has suggested that Carole fed Dawn Lewis to the tigers, but Trish has a different theory involving both the meat grinder and a nearby lake.
I think they left him in that lake. It's infested with gators. If I had to speculate, everything that they did to that man was done at the lake because it was easy, it was out of the way, quiet, nobody's going to walk up on you, you're safe.
Did the sheriff's office ever search that area? Did you know?
Nope.
So it's still been unsearched 23 years later. Nobody's ever searched that area.
And it's been developed since then, but the lake is still there.
If somebody has the ability to not only murder somebody, but to put them through a meat grinder, there is a special kind of crazy. And I don't mean crazy they don't know what they're doing. I mean crazy they have no soul. They have no ability to feel empathy or sorrow or guilt. You would have to be lacking in these frontal lobe brain emotions to be able to do something like that. You would have to be able to convince yourself that this was the right thing to do, and you are righteous in doing it, and go out there and put a smile on your face and not think twice about it. That is a cold, cold human being.
It's a pretty outrageous theory, but worth looking into.
Trish told me that only a few weeks after Dawn Lewis disappeared, that she found a receipt in Kenny's pants pocket where he auctioned off an industrial-sized meat grinder at the Tampa Machinery Auction. But it's really important to be able to check the block off on this one. The owner of it is Dave Nelson. I'm going to sit down and talk to him and see if he has the records.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, sir. How are you?
Thank you so much for spending a few minutes to talk to me.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure.
So, I'm an investigator. I used to be a homicide investigator. Worked for the United States Secret Service for a little while as well.
Okay.
I've been looking into the disappearance of Dawn Lewis. Are you at all familiar with Dawn Lewis? Did you do a lot out of here?
Sure, I knew Dawn.
You did? Okay.
Yeah, I did. I started working here in 1982, and Dawn was already a customer at that time.
What kind of stuff was he purchasing out here?
Oh, he traded in anything. Anything he thought he could make $1 on, he'd trade.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dawn was a Don was very street smart.
So you did get to meet him and get to know him over.
Oh yeah,
over the first time.
Don was a great guy. He was strange, but you know,
strange as
eccentric.
Yeah.
You know, he loved animals. I think he liked animals more than he liked people. But you know, he was always very quiet, soft-spoken guy. Never had any problems with him. You know, he always did what he said he was going to do. That's one of those guys. You know.
One of the reasons why I wanted to come in and talk to you, I ended up getting a statement from an ex-wife of Kenny Farr. Just within a few weeks of Don Lewis disappearing, he auctioned off an industrial-sized meat grinder.
Okay.
So that brings me here, because I'm curious to know if you guys have files. We're looking back around August to September of 1997.
Well, I know I wouldn't have any hard copies. What year was that again? Remind me.
It would have been August to September of 1997.
Let me take a look real quick, but I don't believe I go back that far.
The company purges records after 7 years, so he's unable to retrieve the receipt.
I'm just not going to have it.
What do you think happened to Don?
You know, it's hard to say. But like I said, Don was eccentric, so I guess at first people thought, he could have just gotten a plane and left, you know. But as time went on, it just didn't
fit. You didn't seem to be that kind of guy, huh?
No, not that would just disappear forever.
Loved his animals too much.
Oh, his animals, his money. You know, he had properties and money stashed all over the place. It wasn't unusual for Don to have a fistful of money in his pocket. But I really don't think he, on his own, just disappeared. I think probably somebody killed him.
Some foul play.
My gut tells me that.
That's my goal, is to get to the bottom of it. And
well, I hope you do. I mean, something like that deserves justice.
Trish's theory is that after Don was put in the meat grinder, he was dumped in a local lake. And wouldn't you know it, Don Lewis owned a lake house.
As I am going through Don's property records, I noticed a lake house that was sold in 1998, exactly 1 year after Don Lewis went missing. Could his body in the meat grinder have been dumped there? We're going to check it out and see.
Jim follows up on Trish's lead, which takes him to a lake in Brandon, Florida.
It would be very easy to dump a body in this lake, especially in 1997, because this residential community around here did not exist. So you really just had Don Lewis's lake house surrounded by woods. So you really had nobody to be able to see anything. Very much an ideal spot.
Lots of alligators in that area, and that's actually a very easy thing to do if you kill somebody, to carry the body and toss it in a swamp.
Don Lewis's lake house was a direct shot to the southwestern portion of the lake. And when you're looking for a body, there is a high chance that it could be in their own backyard. Most people are going to travel the path of least resistance. So the most likely scenario for how somebody would have disposed of Don's body at that time would be in the lake.
The lake in Brandon has never been searched by law enforcement. The only way to find out if Don's remains are in the lake is to search it.
There's a lot of factors that get involved when you're talking about doing water searches. I just think it's incredibly important to reach out to those that are experts in their field.
Good morning.
Mike Zinzer is a world-class water investigative expert. He's been in the Navy, he's set up underwater crime scenes for Florida State University, he's worked on important cases like TWA Flight 800 that crashed off of Long Island, he's worked on the Natalie Holloway case, and countless amount of others. He is an expert in this field, and so bringing in Mike to this case to help us search for possible remains of Don Lewis is real important. We also have Captain Mike Hadsell of Peace River Canine Search and Rescue. He's an expert in the use of highly trained cadaver dogs and sonar.
This dog can sniff out both machinery and a body.
Game on.
Next time on Joe Exotic, Tigers, Lies, and Cover-Up.
He was only 59 years old when he was declared missing. I love you, Daddy.
We want to make sure that we do everything we can to leave no stone unturned.
A high-stakes search for Don Lewis's body.
And the dog starts alerting.
Like you're thinking in this area?
Leads to a confrontation with a key player.
We are going to try to make contact with Kenny Farr. How you doing, bud?
New information changes the trajectory of the search. And with Team Tiger behind him, could Joe Exotic be looking at a presidential pardon?
I'm finally glad that, Don's family is finally maybe going to get some answers out of this.
Because I have not yet rented a backhoe, drove it to Easy Street, and dug up the septic tank, okay?